Today we celebrate Divine Mercy Sunday. And as many of you probably know, this is a relatively new feast in the church. It was proclaimed by Pope John Paul II. I'm not sure of the exact date, but I believe it would have been in the 90s when he declared this first Sunday after Easter Sunday, or the second Sunday of Easter, Divine Mercy Sunday. And also the Divine Mercy Novena, which many of our Catholic faithful observe, was also put in place at that time, in addition to the proper prayers for the feast. I think that because it's such a new feast, we're still, as a church, figuring out how to celebrate it. And I think there's a fair amount of confusion about what exactly we are celebrating on Divine Mercy Sunday. And one of the things that I would say, because you might say, well, wait a minute, why is it that the first Sunday, the first week of Easter, which is a joyful time, we're contemplating, we're asking God for mercy, and we're thinking about all of this. We're asking for the sake of your sorrowful passion, if you think of the Divine Mercy Chaplet, have mercy on us and all the whole world. It seems like a very somber and very kind of non-resurrection theme, and it would seem to not be necessarily well suited to this time. But St. Faustina and John Paul II were not misguided in their placement of it here if we celebrate this feast according to the way that I think it should be celebrated. And I think the key is to understand that this is not Human Depravity Sunday. It's Divine Mercy Sunday. You know, if you think about how much of our reflection on divine mercy, we're not actually reflecting on divine mercy. We're reflecting on human depravity. We're thinking about how much we need God's mercy. Oh, look at how horrible things are. Look at how bad sin is. Well, wait a minute. That's not what this Sunday is celebrating. This Sunday is celebrating divine mercy. And divine mercy is what God is doing. Human depravity, that's always there. And we don't celebrate that on a Sunday, let me tell you. That's just the status quo, right? Human depravity, that's exactly why our Lord came into this world. But divine mercy shows us another dimension of Easter. In fact, I would say it makes sure that we have really taken Easter seriously. In other words, it shows us the depths, the length, the breadth of the salvation that was won for us on Easter Sunday, on the cross. That Christ's divine work was not just for holy people. His divine work, his love poured out for us on the cross, extends to the very bowels of human misery, sinfulness, twisted dysfunction, the kinds of things that we don't want to see, the kinds of things we don't want to even talk about, the kinds of things that only come up in confession. Christ's salvation, his love, goes there. You know, and I think this is where Divine Mercy Sunday should actually, and maybe it challenges, you know, we're very comfortable, many of us, sitting there reflecting on how depraved human beings are and how much this is such a miserable valley of tears, and if only people and the world would be reconciled to God. But when we have to sit there and think about the divine life of the cross, entering into and redeeming and saving those miserable and even scandalous aspects of human life, that's a little more challenging. That Christ's love would save us from things that we would want to condemn, where we would not want to show mercy, where we would say there is no salvation. No, that is too disturbing. We don't want to put our fingers in the wounds. We don't want to put our fingers in the side. That's too gruesome. It's too sick and twisted that people would do that. How can Christ's salvation go there? If we're honest, I think we're all at a certain point in contemplating divine mercy, we're going to be uncomfortable. Because it means that the salvation of Christ will go somewhere where we don't want to go. Where we don't think that the salvation and grace of Christ from one for us on the cross, we don't think it can get there. We don't think it should be there. Not with that person. Not with that sin. That's beyond what Christ can save. That's beyond his redemption. But Divine Mercy Sunday says otherwise. And there's a reason that it came from Polish saints. Because if any people had seen the depths of human depravity, it was the Polish people. They had been overrun by the Nazis and were home to the most horrific extermination camps. I visited Auschwitz. It's diabolical. And if that weren't enough to see the depths of absolute human just twistedness, in come the Russians immediately following and invade and carry out further persecutions. And some Poles would argue an even more oppressive occupation and persecution of the church. This is the ground that St. Faustina and St. John Paul II lived in. They had an experience of human depravity in a way that none of us, or very few of us, would. They watched people do the most horrendous things, the most horrific things. And yet, in the midst of that, they also saw God's mercy and love and salvation at work. I was fortunate to be able to encounter St. John Paul II a number of times. And one thing I will say is this: the man was not obsessed with human depravity. He was one of the most joyful people you would ever meet. When he told us to observe this day as Divine Mercy Sunday, he was clearly not dwelling on the horrific and just disturbing nature of human sinfulness. He wanted us, on the contrary, to understand what he saw and what he lived, which was the saving power of Christ's resurrection precisely in the middle of that. How does that translate to you and I? Well, we're not living perhaps in the midst of, no, Some of us have very quiet, unseen places where we experience a lot of dysfunction and a lot of torment. Maybe other people don't even know. But most of us, many of us, do not. I would say there are two main things for us to take from this. If we find ourselves in a place where we say, maybe I haven't had a huge brush with sinfulness and with evil. I haven't sunk to those depths. Well, then I would think the challenge of Divine Mercy Sunday is to see that divine life goes to those depths and to be very careful that we don't put a limit on divine mercy. That we should make sure and examine today, are there places in the world that I have decided are off limits to the saving power of Christ and his work, his divine life? Have I decided that certain causes are lost causes that God's mercy can't reach? Have I become judgmental? Do I really embrace divine mercy as a perspective, as a way of seeing the world? Or do I have certain sins in my mind that are really, if I think about it, unforgivable? Because that would be entirely opposed to divine mercy, which knows no bounds. And the second lesson, I think, for those who maybe have encountered or experienced or themselves even been somewhat participating in what they would consider to be depraved or very sinful things or acts. Have I despaired of the saving power of Christ? Am I looking at these? Am I still a slave to these sins and to the evil and sinfulness of this world? Have I decided that God can't reach certain areas of my life? Have I created a dichotomy in my life where I just kind of keep certain things over here and try to not look at them because I don't think God can handle that? Well, he can handle it. Divine mercy says that there is nothing, not murderous, adulterous, twisted, sick kinds of behavior. There's nothing that can keep us from the saving power of Christ and his salvation. Nothing. If we turn that over to our Lord and we ask for the saving redemption of Easter to enter into our lives, he can free us. So I hope that as we celebrate, we're continuing to understand and to deepen our celebration of this Divine Mercy Sunday. It is a celebration of Easter, not of Lent, of divine mercy, not human depravity, of freedom, of liberation. Think about how you feel when you come out of a confessional. That's Divine Mercy Sunday. The experience of God's mercy is a liberating, joyful experience. That's what we celebrate today. And it is a beautiful unfolding of and deepening of the reality of Easter. So let's ask the Lord to help us to share the joy of divine mercy, the freedom of divine mercy, the confidence and assuredness of divine mercy with those we meet today and as we continue our celebration of Easter.